You've seen them, those riders at Starbucks on Saturday mornings with the newest, biggest, most expensive adventure touring motorcycles, having their final Frappuccino before setting off to Patagonia. I mean, the Patagonia in South America, not the retail store. But do you need to spend that much or fantasize about going that far? In this episode of El Camino, we buck the trend and overland close to home on motorcycles you can afford. El Camino is brought to you by Yamaha, revs your heart. Importations TBO, distributor of power sports parts and accessories. And by GP Bikes, Canada's power sports authority. Welcome to El Camino. Nature. Getting away from what doesn't matter, like cities and traffic, and your neighbors, the ones that play the music you hate for Sunday brunch. Getting back to what matters, fresh air, sparkling waters, and the cool richness of forests dappled in sunlight. The thing we used to do to flee all that would stress us was called camping. But camping as a word just doesn't cut it anymore. People from the suburbs go camping with massive aluminum camping trailers, the ones with the swishy graphics that do absolutely nothing to disguise the fact that they look like giant porta potties flipped on their side. What's needed is a word to upgrade camping. It's a modern thing, in case you haven't noticed, but nothing is simple anymore. Take bicycling. Just riding is a thing of the past. You need spandex, shoes that clip into pedals, a bicycle that weighs less than a pound of bacon, and a Peloton. Because it's an absolute requirement that you ride this far off the rear wheel of the rider in front of you for the draft, like you're in the Tour de France, even though you've got one lame knee, a troublesome hip, and you're not an elite athlete, but a middle manager in plastics recycling. Camping has become overlanding. Never mind that going overland is a prerequisite for any kind of travel. Just going to the outhouse requires going overland, even if it's just out behind the house. But overlanding, with its aura of wildness, with its you can't make me stick to the road defiance, is, like upgrading from economy to business class. Kind of the same thing. It just sounds better. And just like that airfare upgrade, it's expensive, really expensive. This is not tenting people. We're talking tactical gear, military grade, knives that can slice concrete, pop-top carbon fiber living pods on the tops of Land Rovers and Land Cruisers, flashlights bright enough to melt wildlife, individually packaged dehydrated foods as expensive as prime rib, clothing that can withstand nuclear fusion gone wrong. Why this trend? Why this thinking outside the tent disruption? Well, you already know the answer. Instagram envy. To show you're not a regular person leading a regular life. You're an outlier, a renegade, a rebel. Or at the very least, you've got good credit. But before we motorcyclists look down our nose at the uppity Land Rover crowd, we should really look in the mirror, because motorcyclists are among the worst offenders in the overlanding universe. Now, back when it was just called camping, it was the domain of oddballs on old BMWs and Moto Guzzi's, quasi-survivalists with 500 tins of chickpeas stored in a home-built bunker beneath the garage. Weirdos and cheapskates went camping. But they're not welcome in the overlanding universe. They're just too uncool. But those riders with ballistic-grade riding suits on big adventure touring bikes with metal saddlebags, now we're getting warmer. Here's the contradiction. Many of us, if we bought a big BMW GS or a Ducati Multistrada or a KTM Adventure, wouldn't have any money left to go anywhere. And unless your CV includes a respectable finish in the Paris-Dakar Rally, you're just not good enough to take a machine that monstrous into the dirt, into real dirt. And if you dump it, and you will dump it, unless you're a regular at CrossFit, oh, by the way, which used to be called going to the gym, you're never going to be strong enough to hoist the bike back onto its wheels. See the problem? But does it have to be this way? Does all overlanding have to take place in the Coyote versus Roadrunner American West, or in the Rockies, or in Namibia? And must it be done on a motorcycle many of us can't afford? It's a question that needed an answer. I rounded up my traveling pal Jen Carrier, and we set out to find out. But what to ride? We've established that big bikes suck in the dirt, and hardcore dirt bikes are no fun on pavement. And if a bike is unaffordable, then this entire escapade is a non-starter. One bike was a given, Kawasaki's KLR 650. It's a bike that reminds me of something. I just had it on the tip of my tongue. It's slipped my mind. Give me a second. No, it'll come to me later. The KLR is cheap, as reliable as an outhouse, not particularly good at any one task, and not especially dreadful at anything else. It's in. Choosing a second bike was more of a challenge. Smaller riders, women or men, who'd like to take a motorcycle off-road have been seriously overlooked by manufacturers. The problem is obvious. To get decent suspension travel, it's necessary to boost seat heights. But a tall, top-heavy bike like the KLR is never going to work for Jen's 5'4". Honda's CRF 300, however, will. It got the call. But where to go? I hear Colombia's nice. I had a great time in Peru once. But either of those would be a stretch in the 2 days we've got. We compromise. Bancroft in Eastern Ontario will be where our trip starts. It's not exotic, but it's close. And in Bancroft, we'll connect to the off-road network called the Eastern Ontario Trails Alliance. Overlanding on the cheap. We can do this. Or can we? Jen, as a fishing and hunting native of North Bay, is better prepared for these kind of tasks than I am. Camping, overlanding, is what I call a hotel without a cocktail bar. In a Bancroft parking lot, we take inventory. 2 riders and lots of stuff to figure out where to stuff. Jen is confident we have what we need. Emails have gone back and forth, lists have been made, things have been crossed off lists. Eventually, we're set, so says Jen. But not before I'm taught how to tie a knot. A knot Jen's father taught her when she was 2.5. Northerners, different breed. This segment is brought to you by Yamaha. Welcome back to El Camino. Truthfully, I don't know much about riding off-road, other than this. Keep your eyes up, stay loose, and more throttle is better than less throttle, more or less. We discovered that the trail system is mostly repurposed rail beds, but just because it's not challenging single track doesn't mean it's not challenging. Because just when you relax, you hit a stretch of trail with rocks the size of softballs. And the bike starts to wander, like a man after 4 cocktails. And you have to let it go. You breathe, you keep your eyes up, you stay loose. More throttle, that's better. Overlanders among you will be disappointed, but Jen and I don't pitch our tents on the side of a mountain or in the high desert. We don't have those things. We could sleep in a field or in the woods, but I could really use a shower, and we need groceries for dinner. Again, we compromise to a provincial park. After all, when you're sleeping on the ground, it really doesn't matter where you are. At the campsite, we have one eye in the sky and the other on the ground. That's the ground we'll be sleeping on. The sky grows darker. The pressure is building because whoever unpacked the tents back at the office removed and did not replace the instructions. Tents, not unlike motorcycle engines, make perfect sense when they're bolted together. But take them apart, toss the bits on the ground, and it's anyone's guess what goes where. Jen, mind you, will not be defeated by this fact. She continues on as if all she does, all day, every day, is assemble tents that are missing instructions. And wouldn't you know it, she figures it out. Off to the town of Campbellford we go to buy food for dinner. The evening's fate is sealed when we enter through the exit door, then have to climb over the barrier to actually enter the store. With a ferocious hunger, we return to the campsite to begin prepping dinner. Now, this is the point at which we're deep in denial about the weather system headed our way. Out come the phones and into our weather apps we go, looking for the one that will tell us what we'd most like to know, that the rain will somehow miss us. But as you can see, that's not going to happen. We're on a collision course with a whole lot of ugliness. What's lost on us is that the longer we take to look for an unrealistic forecast, the closer we are to drowning in our tents. Eventually, Jen faces the music and says,
"Oh yeah, we have some weather coming."
She speaks the truth. This segment is brought to you by Best Western Hotels and Resorts. Welcome back to El Camino. With a newfound sense of purpose, we race to town as fast as we can. While sitting in the only open restaurant in town, we watch it roll in. Black sheets of rain. Now I think of those tents, those poor tents that will house those poor people. And that's when I think that overlanding or camping or sleeping next to the woodpile is just a silly idea. Our forefathers and our foremothers invented things, wonderful things, like the box spring and the mattress topper. Who are we to turn our backs on progress? I'm not wearing a loincloth or chasing a boar with a spear. I have a textile suit and was about to eat food from a grocery store before all of this happened. And now I return to the campground to face my fate. Night of the Living Dead. All right, I admit that I was overreacting last night. The night really wasn't that bad. The rain on the nylon fly was soothing. And the air mattress, while offering no more comfort than sleeping on a waffle, was at least a barrier between my backside and the wetness, half an inch from my tailbone. And then I remembered from my childhood the most alarming part of overlanding or camping or whatever you call this. Wet mornings, where everything is damp, from your socks to your underwear to your frontal cortex. Under these conditions, even your old friends let you down. Friends like coffee, which is so damp it won't rise out of the coffee maker. It's in there, I know it is, but it won't come out. And then Jen burns breakfast and accuses the stove of having a hot spot, which I thought was the point of a stove, till I was corrected. But it doesn't matter. Burnt or not, we wolf down the food and then pack our wet everythings back into our bags and hit the road for our second night. Today is a short day of riding. We're heading to Presqu'île Provincial Park, only an hour or so away. A short day of riding is exactly what I need. I'm damp and I'm grumpy. And then my gift comes to my aid, my amnesia. Maybe it's a hangover from the effects of having raised a teenage daughter, but I can forget pretty much anything in pretty much no time at all, including how grumpy I was just a few minutes ago. All it took was a fresh summer morning and sunshine. All it took was today. An easy ride on a perfect morning was good, but what I was really looking forward to was bowling. I'd always assumed Jen was in a league, but her odd look told me that I said something otherwise. And Brighton, the town closest to the campsite, has a 5-pin bowling alley I've always wanted to try, right in the main street, built in the 1940s. My kind of oddball destination. And they were closed. To the campsite we go. Whereas last night's landlocked campsite was damp and claustrophobic, Presqu'île is open and expansive. Our gear strewn around our site dries in no time from a strong breeze off the lake. And then I begin to see the appeal of all this. Pleasure is just the flip side of a coin. On the other side is deprivation. It's about the contrast between the two. To be dried by the sun after having been chilled to the bone is pure physical pleasure. It all starts to come together. Motorcycle overlanding is the act of intentionally making yourself vulnerable, of opening up to opportunity as much as it is allowing for the vagaries of weather and circumstance to invade our personal private bubbles. Which is me saying that I'm still more than a little disappointed that the bowling alley was closed. This segment is brought to you by GP Bikes. Welcome back to El Camino. Our night on the beach is perfect. Lulled to sleep by the waves and woken early by the wind, our final morning begins with a fire and coffee that rises out of the coffee maker as it should. It's time to reflect. 2 nights, for the more intrepid of you out there, is laughably short. We did not ride the Dempster Highway to the top of the world. And yet we did something just as significant. We did what we could. We did what we could fit in, what we could afford. Rather than look at cost as no budget Ewan and Charlie adventuring, and then realizing, disappointingly, there's no way we can measure up, we didn't even try to measure up. We didn't try to compete. And by doing so, we were freed. Let's take care of some housekeeping. Things this trip taught me. Firstly, the weather ultimately is the boss. Also, don't go alone. As much as it's tempting to be a wild wolf and forage alone, you're only one topple over and a head bonk away from a world of misery. We were traveling in the height of summer, and yet we didn't meet a single other vehicle off-road. Also, be keenly aware of fuel range. Smaller bikes use less fuel, and who doesn't love that? But the smaller fuel tanks of dual sport motorcycles means paying attention to fuel range. And think carefully about your travel kit. And don't pack in a parking lot on the morning you're hitting the road. That's a recipe for forgetting something. It's also worth noting that travel distances off-road can take shockingly longer than the same distances traveled on-road. Picking your way along a rocky trail at 30 kilometers an hour just kills the day's total mileage. Which leads me to the most important thing I learned from our getaway. And that's this. Less, in fact, is more. I know it's a cliche. We say it from the plush leather seats of our Escalades. Less is more. But we don't mean it. We're not a society that embraces a less is more ethos. We live in a more is more world. And it's a mistake. We buy motorcycles for a trip, like riding around the world, that we're unlikely to ever make. Which means the rest of the time we're hauling a lardy too big, too expensive to fix when you dump it machine around day in and day out. And that pricey mega displacement motorcycle does something else. It sneers at us, both our inability to make the time to ride it, and then when we do use it, at our inability to use it as it was supposed to be used. Now, I'm a decent rider. Some of you certainly are far better in the dirt than I am. But a bike flopped on its side is a bike flopped on its side. And if you can't get it back onto its wheels, it's worth nothing. Thank you for watching El Camino. Oh, hey, whoa, hang on a second. I thought of a few more things. Plastic wine glasses and a corkscrew, second dinner plate, and don't assume you can get espresso beans everywhere. Extra gas cylinder would have been nice. Spare riding gloves, something lighter if it gets too hot. Ziploc bags for your socks and underwear. And don't get your feet wet. Running shoes can work in a pinch. Power bars, water, bug spray, sunscreen, tick spray. How do we get wood to the campsite on a motorcycle? Can't remember that. Oh, earplugs. And remember to check the hours of the bowling alley. And a can opener. Adjustable wrench, for chain tension. Chain lube, especially in the wet. Have you ever been wet on a motorcycle when it's not wet? Good luck with that. Where was I? Clothing was provided by Importations TBO. El Camino has been brought to you by Best Western Hotels and Resorts. Wherever life takes you, Best Western is there. Scott Sports, no shortcuts. And by Spring Toronto Motorcycle Super Show.